Right. Hi there, everyone. So thank you for joining us today for Stop Cutting Corners presented by Superior Glove. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. My name's Matt Burtney. Our speaker today is Duane. He's worked in construction, farming, and education, to name a few industries. He's a bit of a jack of all trades. He's someone who can point you in the right direction, no matter the subject. After a life-altering injury cost him the use of his thumb and 3 fingers on his right hand, Duane developed Stop Cutting Corners, a safety leadership presentation based on his experiences. Duane has presented his thought-provoking and inspiring message of safety to a number of organizations, including DuPont Pioneer, University of Regina, and here at Superior Glove's headquarters. His presentation inspired our organization so much that we wanted to share his powerful story with others involved in the safety industry. So we're going to start with Duane's presentation, and then we'll have about 15 minutes at the end for a Q&A session. So if you do have questions throughout Duane's presentation, feel free to type those in the question box below. So I will pass it over to Duane, and he can take us on his journey.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Matt. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in as well. I'm just going to tell you my story, and then, like you said, we'll have an opportunity for some Q&A at the end. I'm not quite getting the mouse action yet, so. Oh, there it comes. So I'm going to start off with a couple quick questions. First of all, how serious do you think an injury has to be before it impacts you? And second, imagine you're aware of safety at home as much as you are at work. What actions would you have to change, and why? When people ask me, what is cutting corners? And cutting corners is simply the process of removing part of a process, attempting to achieve the same result at the end. But if you're sacrificing either quality or safety, it's not a trick of the trade, it's a trap, and you will get caught. This is what happened when I cut a corner. I guess the previous slide didn't show up. It basically shows a dog sled team. A dog sled team, if they cut corners, they can't go anywhere. It sort of gets all tied up around the tree, right here. And my hand is the result of me cutting a corner. I did something I knew to be unsafe, but I did it anyways just to save some time. Cutting corners is really about where are you taking safety into your own hands, or taking that extra risk just for time, effort, or whatever. I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is D.Janiskevich. You can use the hashtag handsafety. If you want to tweet during the webinar, feel free to do so. And on the bottom corner, you can see my website is actually stopcuttingcorners.ca. Feel free to get in touch with me after the presentation if you like. I'm from Saskatchewan. This is a weather map just from last week. For those of you who may be down in the States, minus 50 is pretty much minus 50 in Fahrenheit as well. So it was very cold. It's not always like this. And in fact, today it's about +3, which would be about 36 degrees Fahrenheit. In the early years, I grew up in town, but we had a farm. My dad had a construction company, and after high school, I went and got my diploma in civil technology. I became a civil technologist, and then because I really love speaking, I actually worked at that for a couple of years, and then I got into education and became a teacher. This is actually one of my dad's pieces of equipment. He did have newer machinery than this, but this is, I guess I just wanted to show you, growing up, I was always around equipment, and I think I had this attitude that I can do whatever needs to be done. That's part of maybe a farming mentality sometimes. If there's things that need to be done, you have to figure out a way to do it. I wouldn't call myself a risk taker. I certainly didn't at first, but if you look at a picture like this where I'm about 30 feet high in that tree, that certainly would show you that I was willing to take some risks just to get things done. And so I had this safety attitude. Decisions have consequences that are tied to them. Some decisions in life are very small and inconsequential or inconsequential, and some decisions are very big. The big decisions we tend to think about long and hard. If we're moving somewhere, if we're going to a different city or town, if we're going to take a certain job on, those types of things, we think about long and hard, and we figure out what we're going to do. But small decisions might be, can I take this text while I'm driving? Or that light doesn't look that red, I'm sure I can make it. Those small decisions can have a huge impact on you. And the presentation isn't about saying, oh, I got to second guess everything in my life. It's just taking those small decisions and really thinking about them. Stop yourself when you find you're cutting a corner or taking a risk that you shouldn't take. Feel free throughout the rest of the webinar, just if you have a comment you want to type in, we have a couple of folks who are from Superior who are taking those comments, and we'll be able to ask questions at the end. But where have you cut corners, or where have you seen others take those shortcuts that you would go, what are you doing? Have you witnessed a near miss? Have you shared that with somebody? And also, like, have there been times where you forgot your PPE? So just different things that you go, oh, what was I doing in that moment? And again, there's my Twitter handle. This sign looks relatively innocuous. I was standing actually in Regina here, Regina, Saskatchewan. I was on the street corner and I was waiting for this sign to come up. The previous sign was the stop sign, the hand. And I made it to the corner, and the lady beside me, she was waiting for the walk sign. She was waiting. Once it turned in this shape, once it turned into that walk sign, she took off across the street. Well, I did one safety thing I've done ever since I was a little kid. Look both ways before you cross the street. That's probably a safety habit most of you have. And on that day, she didn't do that. And I just turned and looked, and there was this truck coming down the street. And I just went, whoa! And the truck hit the brakes, and the lady that was walking across, she jumped back. Well, the truck actually stopped about 2 feet past where she was standing originally. So if I hadn't yelled, if I hadn't taken safety in my hands and actually said something about it, she would have been hit. The pedestrian and the driver, they just sort of shared this glance towards each other. Nothing was said, and then the driver took off. And the lady crossing the street, she said, you might have just saved my life today. And that's what the power we all have when we just stand up for safety, when we dare to speak out. I'm going to tell you my story, I'm going to tell you my negative reaction, my positive reaction, and what's your action. But don't be waiting for your action till the end. Like I said, if you have something you want to type in there, you can type away and in the chat window, and you can type some of those questions, and our organizers will take care of those and we can address them at the end. So in 1993, I became an industrial arts teacher. These were the sorts of projects they started working with. Well, to give you my background, like I said, I started out, I was a surveyor, kind of as a civil tech. I got my degree in education and I started teaching. I had no experience in working with any of the woodworking tools. And when I started, everybody was working on these kind of projects. Well, my biggest thing that kept me safe when I first started was fear. I was afraid of all these tools. In fact, I took every owner's manual that I had and just dissected it and said, what do I have to worry about with this tool? What do I have to do here? And then the other thing is I perpetuated that fear to my class. It wasn't that, oh, you got to watch them for everything, but it was, these tools are dangerous. They don't care whether they're cutting through wood or if they're cutting through bone. So it's a matter of making sure we're handling them safely. So I told everybody, we're not going in the back to work on the projects. And actually, when I started in January of 1993. And when I started, I said, they were already working on their projects for 3 months, 4 months. And I said, we're not going back there. We're going to learn all about these tools and use them safely. If you're a young worker, you have the right to ask for that safe environment. You have the right to ask for training. And that sort of thing I never thought of. I just wanted to be the best IA teacher I could be. Over time, I did excel, and I managed to, gain some expertise. Although I never actually made that last table. That was just a picture I got off the internet. But it does look very nice. But I did develop some expertise, and I've done different renovations. I guess I've done 4 different house renos. 3 of them were kitchen renos. And this is my daughter, Kylie. She's actually helping me take down this wall. And this was the reno, actually, like I said, you will get caught. This is the reno I got caught in. If you've ever done a kitchen reno, everything's upside down and backwards. I've done roughly 1,500 square feet of hardwood, so no stranger to doing hardwood. In fact, I find it to be one of the easiest floorings you can install. And this is the way this is looking into my kitchen and kind of the way things were laid out. Now this is a floor shadow. This is the only picture I took on November 22nd, 2008. The significance of this picture is you can see where the hammer is now, and you can see where it used to be, or where it was. When I look at my hand, I know where my fingers should be and where they're not anymore. See, this picture I took at the start of the day. I was supposed to be working in my living room. In fact, I took this picture and I just made a chalk line, and that's kind of how this showed up, as this little floor shadow. But I made that chalk line at the start of the day, and I had about 25 square feet left to finish in my kitchen. Just a little bit, but it was a bunch of angles and stuff. I spent the whole day in my kitchen. My wife came back at about 5:30, and she said, "You're just there?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm just here." It was so frustrating. I'd worked all day and got nowhere. Well, actually, you know, it was going to be my first piece of flooring that was to go into my living room. This is the cut that I did. It's called a freehand crosscut. I'm not here to tell you to throw out your table saw. I'm just here to tell you, use it the right way. A freehand crosscut means there's no support on this particular piece of wood. It means that if I put the one piece slightly in front of the other, it could throw back at me. So a kickback is caused when the piece of wood jams on that blade. And it might jam between a fence, or it might just jam on its own. And in this case, this freehand crosscut, I tell you, I was doing a very unsafe thing in the safest manner I could. I was pushing that thing as carefully as I could, making sure I was keeping it straight, knowing the whole time this could kick back. But I still took that risk. Why? Well, you might say, well, Duane, there's other tools you could use. I actually just had to cut the corner out of this piece of wood. Which is kind of how I got the name for my presentation, but I had to make a notch, so going down one way and over. I didn't have to go all the way through the piece of wood. The jigsaw is the right tool to use. I usually ask that in my presentations, what tool, and always the jigsaw comes out. Well, I have this trick of the trade that I use. I put a piece of tape on the bottom of my jigsaw, and when I cut that piece of wood, the tape just makes sure that the bottom of the jigsaw doesn't scratch the piece of wood. And on this day, my jigsaw was dull, or that tape wasn't there. The other thing I use is a bandsaw blade, and I knew my bandsaw blade was dull. This is actually the piece of wood right here, and so I didn't use my bandsaw because that was another probably 5 minutes to go and get a bandsaw blade, a sharp one. What I did was I said, you know what, I just have a new blade in my table saw, and I'm just going to use it, even though I know it's not the right tool. I honestly went through all these things in my head, and I still went ahead and did it. And you can see on the bottom here, you can see what I call a torque shadow. I mean, you can see the torque that was displayed on this piece of wood. I started pushing that piece through the table saw, and actually, you know what, I got away with cut. I got it up to a certain point, but then what I did next was even worse. I started to pull that piece of wood back from the blade. And when I pulled it back, I heard it go, "Wong!" and it just nailed me. And I remember, before I even looked down, I remember thinking, I want a do-over. Then I looked down at my hand. No! I screamed no as loud as I could. So when I looked at my hand, my middle finger was laying in my hand, my thumb was laying in my hand, and I didn't know where my other fingers were. And it was just like that. It was done. And it's too late to respond. You know, you have time before an injury to respond. You have time to plan it out. And you have time after to think about what you should have done differently. But when it's happening, it is instant. It is right now. And it was too late. Well, that decision I made had some serious consequences. That decision I made impacted my entire family. The next 3 slides are a little harsh, so feel free to just look away from the screen for a little bit. But that consequence was very real. And this is what I had to live with. And so people, it's unforgiving. That table saw didn't care. But it wasn't even the table saw, it was the piece of wood, because the piece of wood was flying back off the table saw. That piece of wood got jammed in that blade and was threw back at me. So it was a crushing injury. It was just following the laws of physics. It was nothing personal, nothing that it had done out of malice. It just happened to me. It's unforgiving. But it was preventable for sure. I had 3 pins in my hand, 6 hours of surgery. I said to the doctor, I don't remember this cut right in the middle of my hand. Like, that wasn't there before. How did that get there? He said, well, that's where we had to cut your hand open. And if you look at your hand right now, you can see that little curvy line in your hand. He said that's where we had to cut into your hand and reach down your arm to reattach your tendons to your fingers. And here's the last sort of gross slide. This is all preventable. I remember the first time I saw this picture, I just cried. I thought, I'm going to be flipping people off for the rest of my life. Because, I mean, it's right there. You can see it so evidently because the other 2 fingers are shorter and that middle finger just sticks out. So that was a little bit of a mental hurdle to get over. But what are the causes of injuries? Well, actually what I did after, the first thing I did when I got home from the hospital, I went back into the shop and tried to figure out what exactly happened and how it worked. But really, if you look, these are some of the causes of injuries. I created this acronym called HURT. Hurried decision or action, unknown or unaddressed hazard, respect for self, tool, process, and environment, and tool selection and usage. On that day, I transgressed on every one of those things. So my owner's manual looks like this. Freehand cutting is the major cause of kickback and finger hand amputations. It says it with like all this white space around it. So if you do any publishing, that's one of the things. Like it makes it pop, makes it stand out if they have space around it. It's right in my owner's manual. So now I ask people, what does your procedure manual say? What is the correct way that you should be doing this? And if you know that correct way, why didn't you do it that way? The little note on the bottom, don't allow familiarity or frequent use of your table saw or whatever tool it is to cause careless mistakes. Even a careless fraction of a second can cause severe injury. So it's about recognizing that we have hazards. There are certain dangers we have to be aware of, and we have to make sure we mitigate them. Not that we say, oh, I don't respect that anymore, and I'm just going to ignore that. These are your 10 best tools. This is a picture of my dad. I said, Dad, I want to see all your fingers. He's been in construction his entire life. He's 73. These meet OEM specifications. There's things I can't do with my hand because of the surgery, because of how I've recovered. So now I'm going to talk about my negative reaction. I'm going to talk about how this impacted me and how I ended up moving forward in this. Well, the first thing was disbelief, the yelling of no as loud as I could. In fact, I thought yelling no was a good way to let my wife know something had gone sideways in the garage. So I yelled no again really loud, and then I ran to the door, and I'd actually tried to put a tourniquet around my hand, and I couldn't get it together. I couldn't do it. I was trying to do it with one hand and tighten it, and I couldn't get it done. So I opened the door. I said, call 911, call the hospital. I've been hurt bad. I got fingers missing and everything. Well, that moment, my son was coming up the stairs. And at that time, my son was 13 years old. I said, buddy, I need your help. And actually, I sort of covered up my hand with the other hand. And I was kind of shading him from it so he couldn't see how bad it looked. Those pictures you saw earlier, those are 5 days after the injury. That's after it's been cleaned up through surgery and everything else. It looked really, really gruesome. So I was holding my hand over and I said, buddy, I need you to grab that rag and I need you to tie up my arm. And I'm pretty sure I said arm, but he started tying both my arms together. And I was like, no, just a damaged one. And he undid it and did it around my arm. Then I came inside, back inside the house. Now, one thing I want you to know before I move on to this slide is you can see on the thumb, they actually crisscrossed those pins. So because the bones that were left were just so very minuscule. Then I came in the house. I said, I'm such an idiot. I'm so stupid. I can't believe I did this. I was so mad at myself. And I remember apologizing to my wife and apologizing to my son because of what I had done and because I knew better. So that was so frustrating. And this is actually a picture of my daughter after she took a soccer ball in the face. But that's where I was. I was like that little kid who was so upset. And that didn't subside quickly. It was you know, something you really have to grapple with. And I remember saying to my wife, we gotta go. And yeah, the pain was there. The pain was immediate. This is my son doing the splits. I think most of the men on the call can associate that with pain as well. I had somebody say, you know, I cut the tip of my finger off. I didn't even feel it. Well, I tell you, I felt it, but it wasn't just a cut. It was a crushing injury. So that piece of wood is what did all the damage. So the pain was off the charts. And I told my wife, let's just go to the hospital. We know where we're going. Let's just go. She said, they're on their way. See, 3 digits later, she was on that 911 call. She was on there right away. She heard that first yell. By the second yell, she'd already got onto the phone. She phoned in 911, was talking to them, and I said, let's just go. And then I said, oh, I think I can hear sirens. And it was the fire department. I was like, fire department, what are they doing here? Well, they were the first responders. The fireman came up the stairs, and he said, who needs the help here? I said, that'd be this idiot right here. I lifted my bloodied hand up in the air towards him. He said, how are you feeling, sir? I said, really stupid. And I said, really? I just feel like bashing my head right through the wall behind me. He said, that wouldn't be a good idea, sir. Then he gave me oxygen. I was like, I breathed for the first time. And he asked me a question. He said, have you got all your fingers? Now, you remember earlier I said I got fingers missing and everything. I said that initially, but when he asked me, I said, yeah, I got them. And then he turned to my wife and he said, where was he working now? And I realized then that I got the answer wrong. It was the wrong answer. And maybe that was starting to be a state of shock. My wife went into the garage with the fireman and found my fingers. She found them underneath the table saw. I tell you, it's a surreal moment when you see your fingers inside of a Ziploc bag. I went to the hospital and they said, rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. And I said, 5. And my wife's like, 5? I said, well, it's just the one hand. So I think it was like I figured I'd maxed out on that one hand. I couldn't take any more in that one hand, but I still had, you know, the ability to take more. Well, because of that low pain rating, I only had one of these pills every 4 hours. So my pain was just through the roof. And a lot of it was because I wasn't being honest. Now, somebody talked to me later. They said, you think that you were trying to punish yourself by saying you had no pain, that you deserved this pain. And psychologically, I may have. Regardless, it was a painful 7 days in the hospital, actually 8. And I managed to make it out of there. And the pain did subside over time. Homunculus is this little man, like, and the hands are so big because the hands talk to your brain a lot. Think of what you've done with your hands today. What tasks have you carried out with your hands? How intricate can they be? Even something like tying a shoe, very simple, but you use your fingers and use a lot of things. People always ask me about the phantom pain. Did you have phantom pain? Well, yes, I did. My little finger, which is actually my ring finger, it's my shortest finger, it felt like I had someone sticking a needle underneath the fingernail, just jabbing it back and forth and back and forth. And I tell you, it was intense. I couldn't switch my brain off to say, I know you're not real, because it felt as real as any other pain. But there was another pain that was even bigger, and that was what I call reattachment pain. The pain of my middle finger and my thumb from being severed and then reattached. And now everything, like I could feel every heartbeat through my hand. It felt like I had the Fred Flintstone hand, like it was dump, 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 dump with every heartbeat. And I just remember thinking, I'll be so glad when that pain's done. Now this broken and shattered. Actually, broken, that looks kind of neat the way that turned out on this slide. But more than just my hand was broken, my confidence was broken. In fact, you know, when I went into the hospital, they said, well, we got to take an x-ray. I'm like, take an x-ray? I'll save you the time. It's broken. But my doctor said, it wasn't just broken, it was completely shattered. All the little pieces of bone, he said, that's why we had that crisscross in there, with to fit your bone around there, sort of tie it up together. But like I said, there was also a mental shattering of sorts. I was thinking, can I ever do renovations again or work again with my hands, or what was going to happen? I had no idea what sort of use I would get out of my hand. Now you could say, well, that's unfair. It's unfair the way it happened. I didn't really stay in the unfair area very long, because I knew what I did caused my injury. Even though I did a presentation a couple of years back, and somebody said, you know, I did that exact same cut at least 50 times when I was doing my hardwood. He said, I didn't have a miter saw, so I used my table saw all the time. I never used it supported. I always just ran it through. And I said, well, you got away with it. But see, that's what this presentation is kind of about. If you let people know where they got away with it, then they can change that action. They can change it so that they're not the next one to get hit. But the unfair thing here, this is actually an x-ray of my daughter, and she was skiing. In fact, she was done skiing. We were going into the chalet, and she was behind me taking her skis off, and a snowboarder was out of control, landed on top of her, snapped her leg in half right over top of her ski boot. Now that was unfair. That was something. She did nothing to deserve that. We now take our skis off on the downhill side of the ski rack, but that snowboarder is responsible. In fact, that's the first law of alpine safety: always be in control. But I didn't stay in the unfair spot very long. I did stay in this spot a long time, and that was loss. Looking at my hand, comparing my right and left hand, sort of like who I was and who I'd become, kind of doing this little comparison in my head and thinking about, what's the first thing you do when you meet somebody new? You shake their hand. So I was thinking, for the rest of my life, people are going to be judging me before they even know me because of what I've done today, because of what I'm living through. And that was a tough thing to work through. And that loss was, it lasted a while. Uncertainty, I didn't know really what was going to happen as far as if I was going to have any sort of coverage through work. At that point in time, I was the only person working in my house. My kids were young. My wife didn't have a job, and because she was looking after the kids. And there was just the uncertainty, not knowing what was coming next. And I just got this picture of my daughter doing the wall climbing, because it was that way. It was like, don't know where your next step is. You don't know what's going to happen. And it worked very well, but I didn't know. I was fragile. I was like this little, one of my former students actually took this picture. He calls it snow bend, but I was like this little piece of snow on the fence. And if you just touched me the wrong way, I felt like I would just fall apart. In fact, I'd be talking to people and telling them about what happened, and I would just start crying. And it's about this whole regret, or this thing in your mind. And actually, I got to the place of regret, which actually can be a beneficial thing. That's another presentation I have. It's called Unleashing the Power of Regret. But it's understanding there's learning in regret, and actually sort of repentance is something you can move forward to. But at that point, it was probably more guilt than regret. And that was just had me in a fragile state. I talked to somebody else who also had a hand injury, actually to his sister. I talked to her, and she said, he just cries for no reason, just out of nowhere. And that's all the stuff you're processing in your mind. Definitely very fragile. It was something that impacted not just me, but my entire family. We were like all trapped because of this. It was something that we had a ski trip planned, and everybody was held hostage to this thing. Nobody was going anywhere because Dad couldn't go anywhere. The doctor told me, don't go outside, because as I showed you earlier, our Saskatchewan winters can be very harsh. He said your nerves are just growing back in your hand. If you go out, you could freeze your hand, and then you'll end up in, worse problems. So you have to make sure you're not going outside. If you're walking, walk inside a mall. But we became very, sedentary. I joke with people. I said, I lost 2 fingers and gained 15 pounds. You do the math. It's one of those things where we just sat around a lot. I look at my hand here in this picture, and you can see the skin is flaking off and everything. But I couldn't help but see dismemberment, kind of like in that movie, The Sixth Sense. I see dead people. Well, I just couldn't help looking at my hand without seeing dismemberment. but yet my insurance didn't classify it as dismemberment. That was really sort of another tough thing to take. So what was my positive reaction? How did I get out of the funk? How did I just say, okay, time to move on, Duane, time to get past this? Well, I think some of it, one of the biggest things is forgiveness. St. Augustine of Hippo said, resentment is like drinking poison, hoping the other person will die. Well, that poison will sit inside you and rot away. And it's something that you have to fight through. You have to figure out how that's impacting you so negatively and what you can do about it. And I actually said it out loud to myself, Duane, I forgive you for doing this. Even though you knew better, I still forgive you. And I tell you, that day, it was like a relief. A weight was lifted off my shoulders. Perspective is huge. And perspective is being able to see something from a different angle, or seeing what you still have, maybe that other people don't have, or whatever. The day I went to the Wascana Rehab, which is a treatment center in Regina, Saskatchewan, and they actually, all they do is hand therapy in this one part of the rehab center. And I was walking through the door, and somebody consoled me for my injury. He was consoling me, but he was doing so from a wheelchair. He was quadriplegic. And I said, man, I don't know half of what you must have gone through. And he said, it didn't hurt. And that day, I tell you, he was a ray of sunshine to me. Todd Smith, in his book, Little Things Matter, he said, if you threw your problems in a pile and saw everybody else's, you'd just go and take yours back. I mean, you would say it's not that big a deal. I tell people, don't tap. Suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. But you don't get to the hope if you stop with the suffering, so you have to push through it. And that's not always a nice thing to do. It's not something that you look forward to in life, but pushing through helps you. Pushing through develops that character. I even think of people who go sailing. They don't just sail in nice sunny days. They sail when the wind is high, and they're trying to figure out what they can handle. I've even talked to some sailors who've gone out in a storm just to make sure that they're ready for it if it ever happens. The Stocktail Paradox says, retain faith that you will prevail, but confront the brutal facts. And this is from the book Good to Great. Confront those facts. So don't say, hey, this doesn't matter. This is no big deal. Be honest with yourself. This really sucks. In fact, tomorrow might even be worse than today. But know that eventually you will get over this thing. Eventually you will prevail. And then look for the blessings. Now, the first night, as you can imagine, my wife did not sleep very well. So that first day, 6 o'clock, 6:05 was when my injury happened. I never got into surgery till 10 o'clock. My wife left right after the surgery. Like I said, it was 6 hours. She couldn't sleep all night. She phoned a friend of hers at 5 in the morning, and her friend said, look for the blessings. Well, I tell you, I wasn't overly receptive to that at first. I was like, yeah, I got less fingernails to clip, or whatever. I mean, you're like, what are the blessings in this? And it's really about looking for those blessings and understanding that they can be a blessing. And it was how people rallied around me, how people helped me out, and letting people bless me. And it was a blessing to them and to myself. I got a lot of encouragement. This is my daughter. She's massaging my hand. This is the interactive part of the session. If you're sitting down in front of your computer, just put your one hand sort of in front of your face and put your other hand around your forearm. And now wiggle your fingers. If you wiggle your fingers, you should be able to feel the tendons moving in the bottom there. And this goose hand is what I had to use because that is the way the tendons are in their shortest format. And there's no pressure on them. And these are my friends sort of mocking me. Laughter breeds resilience. Laughter is the quickest way to get up when you've been knocked down. And sometimes they think you just can't take yourself too seriously. You can't just say, oh, well, this is what I'm going to live with forever. And you got to figure out a way around it. On the left-hand side, you can see some of the shadow puppets. The Riders are a big thing. They're our football team in Saskatchewan. I'm not sure what we're going to be doing this year. We just got rid of our star quarterback. But and then that picture in the middle is, yeah, that little reminder. I have to watch how I wave to people. My son says, Dad, use your other hand. I definitely get some second looks. The love of family, the love of friends, and just being real with that, letting them reach out. Therapy was huge. My therapist said I was the most active patient he's ever had. And he's been in an occupational therapist for like 27 years. So my session would start out, I would be sitting down, then I'd be standing up, and then I'd be kneeling, then I'd be standing up, and it was just so much pain. But therapy is essential. Therapy is something you need to recover, so you have to address that pain. Don't allow limitations to define you, but define what your limitations are. Figure out what you're good with and what you have to improve on. In my case, I actually scaled this wall in Richmond, BC. This one picture is in Saskatchewan, but I was in Richmond, BC recently, and I scaled their wall at the Richmond Oval. So you can keep challenging yourself to say, hey, what can I do different? I wear this glove sometimes, and this is a bit of adaptation, just to keep my hand warm. One of my co-workers said I look like Michael Jackson. I told him to beat it. But there's a lot of lessons, and there's also opportunities. There's opportunities to say, not only what can I do differently, but how can I help other people who may come into the same sort of problem. So that's where today lies. It's in telling the story. If you have a near miss that you haven't shared with somebody, I would encourage you to do that and figure out where it is. I don't know how many sectors are on this call. Maybe we have forestry, manufacturing, mining, a lot of different hand injuries. So I've become quite busy in speaking because hand injuries are very important to a number of different industries and a number of organizations. They say, how can we prevent this? Because I think some people think, oh, my hand will just heal up. In fact, that's where I was after my injury. I was thinking, they're going to sew those things back on. I remember being upset that they didn't actually reattach the fingers that I brought in the Ziploc bag. How significant is a hand injury? Well, I tell people to snap your fingers with your non-dominant hand, but everybody can do that apparently. But try swirling your beverage with a non-dominant hand. Try tying your shoes. So a hurried decision or action, and this unknown or unaddressed hazard, I'm just going to review these things quickly at the end here. And my daughter didn't know that guy was coming. The respect for self, tool, process, and environment. I don't know how many people on this call have ever played with lawn darts. But if you do a search on the internet for lawn dart, you'll probably see a picture of this little guy. That's my son. My wife bought a croquet set at a garage sale. Underneath the croquet set was a set of lawn darts. And later that day, I told the kids, you guys never touch these, they're way too dangerous. And later that day, my daughter's throwing these while my son is in the swing. Very, very fortunate. Hit him right under the eye. He never lost his eye. But that was on me. I provided a warning when I should have took away the hazard in the first place. This is what my lawnmower used to look like. You know, tie that thing up with baler twine so I don't have to worry about the safety. These are little things. But what warning signs are you missing? What little things are there that you say, oh, that's why you do it that way? Safety is in your hands. You can do something about it. Nothing is so important you can't take the time to do it safely. Think about it. Think about the repercussions of this activity or this action you're doing. And if it's putting you in harm's way, step back, stop. Don't do it. Today I'm hoping the impact on you through this presentation is like, wow, that was awesome. I need to do something different. It's not about the presentation saying, oh, Duane, you were so good with your words. It's about how does it relate to your activities and your actions and your life. And how can you just say, hey, I'm going to do this differently. Or, hey, I need to tell people about this thing that I know that could put them in harm's way. Well, see, back when I first started teaching was in 1993. And if you look at the date on this tombstone, it's January 1st, 1993. This is my cousin. In 1993, I started teaching industrial arts. In his hometown, his sister was in my homeroom. And earlier, just after his 23rd birthday, he was up in northern Saskatchewan. He was in just this wood cabin. And the only thing that heated this wood cabin was a wood stove. And it was 5 o'clock in the morning. He woke up and the stove was cold. He woke up, the whole house, the whole cabin was freezing cold, scraping frost off his nose basically. It was so cold in the cabin. He got up and he put some wood into the wood stove. And he made this small decision. His small decision was to put a little bit of camping fuel on top of that wood. Well, there was embers inside the stove, and everything exploded. 90% of his body was third-degree burns. It was just an atrocious activity. Like, my injury can't even compare, not even in a small, minuscule way, to what he suffered and went through. You know, when I had my injury, my first thought was, I want a do-over. And you know, every time I speak to somebody, I feel like I get a bit of a do-over. But Owen never had that do-over. Owen never got a second chance. How many people out there didn't get a second chance to say, hey, you can't do it this way? It's not all about trial and error. We have to learn from other people's mistakes. And that's really what I'm trying to do with this presentation. In my case, a little piece of masking tape, maybe 10 cents worth of masking tape, would have kept me from having this webinar with you today, would have kept me from speaking to people about this injury that I had. I feel like this is part of my destiny. Part of what I need to do is share the message of safety and tell people, stop cutting corners. Stop doing those things that you know are putting yourself in harm's way. I just ask you, is it worth the risk? Is it worth all that you're risking? Think not only of your health and your safety, think of your family. Think of the people who love you and the people you love. Is it worth that risk? And lastly today, I'd just like to say thanks for listening to the call. I usually have a chance to see faces in crowds and know how the impact's coming through. I hope today impacted you. I hope today you went, that was a great use of my hour. Thank you to Superior Glove for allowing me to come and speak. Thank you all for tuning in, and please stop cutting corners. Thank you. These are some of the resources I had, and Matt, you can sort of take control back. And again, thank you everybody for coming out today.
Yeah, thanks for speaking to us today, Duane. And so what we'll do now is we'll take a few questions. So we've had a few come in throughout your talk, and then if anyone does have any questions that they'd like to have some answers to, now's the opportunity to write those in as well. So the first question that a lot of people are a little bit curious about is, are you right-handed?
Yeah, actually I am. I'm pretty ambidextrous now. There are certain activities that I have to do with my left hand. I have a blog on my website. It's called Picking Raspberries. And when I first started picking raspberries, I would pick them with my right hand, and I would find that I kept dropping raspberries because I don't have the dexterity I need. And then over time, it just became natural. I was all of a sudden picking raspberries with my left hand and didn't realize it because the job of holding the bucket is a lot easier to do than to actually pick the raspberries. So something like bowling, I bowl left-handed. Just the extra strength you need, some different tasks. Yeah, I am right-handed, but there are many things I'm left-handed in now.
Okay, and after this injury occurred, how long was it before you started to begin sharing your safety message?
Oh yeah, that was actually the first time I spoke was 6 months after my injury. I actually wasn't even back to work yet, or I was just starting back to work, and that was I was kind of keeping my hand sort of hidden, I guess. I wanted to use it for a bit of a shock factor, and I was talking about table saw kickbacks, and I said, what do you think would happen? And this was a group of 9th grade students in school. What would you think would happen if that piece of wood would actually hit you? Because it can go up to 110 kilometers an hour. And they said, oh, that would really hurt. And I said, this would happen. And I stuck my hand out. And I didn't anticipate their reaction because they all just gasped. And then I actually started to break down because I was like, yeah, that would happen. And it was a bit tough to get through. But and then probably about a year before I really started to say, I need to do this. And I think part of that was the connection between my injury and my cousin's death, where I figured, you know, I can actually connect with people through this story, and I can help them to sort of change those little behaviors or those little thoughts and decisions we make, and start doing the right ones.
Excellent. And after your injury, how long did it take for you to return back to work?
Yeah, I sort of did a graduated program back to work. I'm a business analyst at that point in time, so I was doing lots of typing. So I'm kind of like an 8-finger typist, which still blows a lot of people away because there's a number of 2-finger typists. Yeah, I was about 6 months, and I was really going through a really intense therapy. Like I was very focused on doing all of my exercises all the time. So I couldn't go back full time to start with, and I just wanted to get all the usefulness I could out of my hand. I can actually touch every one of my fingers with my thumb, which was a real goal for a while. Didn't know if I'd ever get there, and now it's super easy. So very thankful for that.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible, considering not many of us are thinking of the goal of, you know, touching a finger to another finger. So that's really something else. Did you have any fears about how people might view your hand when you started doing your presentations?
Yeah, I think it would have been easier for me to just put my hand in my pocket and forget about it, and not tell anybody. In fact, the time of year where I can wear gloves or wear a mitt, I remember looking forward to that, and I called it going incognito. I look just like everybody else when I'm wearing a glove, except you can actually see that my one finger's bent. So that was something where I talked to somebody locally in Saskatchewan here, and I said I really wanted to, you know, talk with organizations who valued safety and get out there. And he said, we have a hard time getting injury survivors to talk about their story. And the big reason is because you have to admit that what you did caused this, or however that worked out. And I've made peace with it all. So I think that has helped me to go through and do this, and it's something where I feel like it's my most awesome job opportunity to share with people and get that impact to them and their company.
Oh, excellent. And we're getting a few questions here, looking for a little bit more of information, I guess, about particularly what happened during your injury. It was the kickback from the wood, correct, that injured your hand?
Yes, that's right. So on a table saw, the blade is always circling towards you. So the blade is always trying to basically throw that wood towards you. But when you're pushing a piece of wood all the way firmly past the blade, you don't have any problems because it's sharp enough that it's actually cutting. It's not throwing. But in my case, like I said, I pulled that piece of wood back from the blade. So I basically gave control over that piece of wood to the blade, and it just threw it. So the best I can figure, it actually flipped over and came through my hand. So it kind of, because my hand was on top of the piece of wood to start with, so it kind of flipped over and through, but it happened so quick, like I said, 110 kilometers an hour, that it can fly off there. So in my case, freehand crosscut, but you could do the same thing if you weren't using the fence properly. So the big thing, again, is just pushing the piece of wood all the way past the blade, and you won't have any problem. Or if you use a sled or a miter gauge, you'll be fine as well.
Okay. And then we have a question of would cut-resistant gloves have been something that would have lessened the injury? Just came in, and from our side of it, from Superior Glove's side of it, it's one of those things, because it was the kickback, cut-resistant gloves wouldn't have really helped in this particular situation. But wanted to get that one cleared up as well. And when you're dealing with something like a table saw, a cut-resistant glove isn't going to necessarily stand up to that kind of intensity.
I did see that you have a number of impact-resistant gloves, but those wouldn't be the sort of gloves you would use using a table saw.
Correct. Was hand safety something you were conscious about prior to your injury there, Duane?
Not at all. No, that was like I said, that was me up in a tree, thinking that I was being safe because I was holding onto the tree really hard. So my safety awareness went up dramatically. I think the issue was after the fact. I was going, how did I get here? How did I get to this spot where I'm willing to take a risk this huge just to save a little bit of time? And I've blogged about it a number of times, different things that I've done, and I go, whoa, like I'm actually very fortunate. I'm not a paraplegic. I jumped into these waterfalls and when I was younger, and I hit a bunch of rocks and I hit them with my tailbone, and those are the kind of the risks because it was just an exciting thing to do, jump into these rapids, and but there was a real drop to them, and I got hurt bad, and it was those sorts of things where I was just taking those risks and I shouldn't. And no, I didn't have to focus on hand safety or safety overall. Although I'm not like an X Games kind of guy, but I think there was a number of risks I was willing to take for sure.
Okay, and then we've had a question as well about the surgery with your hand. Will you have more surgery to straighten your middle finger?
I feel like I've been so fortunate. I actually had follow-up surgery on my thumb, and I had a follow-up surgery on my finger. So this happened in 2008, so 8 years ago, and I just had a follow-up surgery last year to sort of straighten my finger out. It is not yet straight because the soft tissue has pulled it back out of correction. So it's sort of started straight, but all the tendons and everything are sort of shorter on the one side, so it pulls it, and it's once again crooked. But it's pain-free. So pain-free is kind of the big deal. I always had pain in the middle knuckle on my finger, my middle finger, and thankfully that's gone. Like I was telling somebody just the other day, I said, people who deal with chronic pain, that's another whole level. Like I'm so thankful that my pain was really intense, but it was just a concentrated period of time. It was just that time up front, probably like 2.5, 3 weeks, and then it kind of had faded. Whereas people dealing with chronic pain, that's day in and day out, and that's a whole new level, I guess, of appreciation. But that's also part of the perspective thing, And those people might be saying, at least I'm still alive, or at least I have this. So I think we have to make sure that we're thankful where we're at sometimes, and that's something that has helped me move forward for sure.
Okay. And now, Duane, you seem fairly positive on the outlook of your injury. Would that part of that be from the type of support group you had, or could you talk a little bit more about the support that you had around you during the follow-up to the injury?
If you never experience anything like this, I don't know for sure if you know how much people care. And I mean, that sounds odd, but I had people rally around me, my family, my friends, people I worked with said, hey, we're going to come finish your renovations for you. I mean, it was so touching. I have a deep faith as well, and I just feel like sometimes that you have to just lean on and rely on, and that helps pull you through. And that was that one slide where, I said suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance character. It's knowing that you get to the end, there is hope there. And I think very much so, all the support in my life and my family. And then I also knew people were depending on me. So it's a matter of, okay, I'm bigger than this thing. This is only one part of my body. I'm bigger than this thing, and I can move forward. Maybe also having the perspective of what my cousin had gone through, and that it impacted, like his last few weeks were just excruciatingly painful, and he had nothing left, and I thought I got lots left, so that helped.
What would you say that your percentage of recovery in nearly a decade after the accident, what would be that percentage of recovery?
Oh, I think I probably, my hand itself, its function, I would probably place it around like 70% of what I could do before with my right hand. Buttons and some little things are tricky. I have a hard time doing them, but I mean, at the start, I would never get my wife to help me with anything like that. I had to do it. figure it out. Now sometimes I just get her to give me a hand with something, and people don't mind. I mean, I just say, can I get you to do this up or something? And it's usually fine. But yeah, and there's other things I think you just learn how to adapt. Like even using an oil filter wrench to undo container lids, like a sealer lid or something like that. You can use an oil filter wrench, and you don't have to be nearly as strong to do it. In my mind, that was a big thing when I first started too. I was thinking, I can't be the man of the house. I can't open, a jar of jam and whatever else. But you figure out how to, do it differently, and you can still move forward.
Very good. And I guess when you speak to larger organizations, what are people most surprised to find out?
I think one of the biggest things that I've heard numerous times is that, I was never in fear of losing my life. I was never in fear of, am I going to survive tomorrow? It was, I knew I was going to be fine over time. I didn't know how much of my hand use I was going to get back, but I think it's the realization of how much an injury can alter your life and how much it can just change your perspective on everything. So I get lots of comments on, wow, I had no idea a hand injury would be so impacting. And some of it is, I just took the time to dissect it and figure out exactly how each part of it impacted me. And really that helped me process, it helped me move through it all. It helped me say, the Duane of today is a lot better than the Duane of 2008. I feel like my future is so bright ahead of me, and the opportunities I have, and I'm just excited about this whole part of my life, and so it's invigorating. But yeah, none of that would have happened without my injury being sort of the start of it. And it's not to look for an injury so I can change my life. I mean, I could have changed a lot of these things earlier on. It's just that it wasn't a priority, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite things about the presentation, we have to wrap up here shortly, but one thing that I want to bring back into this is when you say early on in the presentation, they call it tricks of the trade, but if it's sacrificing quality or safety, it's not a trick, it's a trap. And for me anyways, that was one of the key takeaways from your presentation, Stop Cutting Corners. So for everyone who's been listening in today, we'll be sending out a copy of today's presentation, as well as a link to Duane's website, which is stopcuttingcorners.ca. So again, Duane, we'd love to thank you for coming out and spending your time with us today and presenting to us about your perspectives on safety and how they've changed since your injury 10 years ago.
You're very welcome. It was I felt honored to be here. Thank you everybody for joining in with us today.
And again, we'll be sending those emails out shortly with a recording of today and a link to Duane's website. So thanks very much, and have a safe day, everybody.
Take care. I also noticed that you have the injuries handout there as well for folks. So thanks, everybody.